You are listening to Now That's a Good Question, a podcast series powered by Sook, where changemakers from across the world answer your queries on sustainable lifestyle. After all, it's not just good on you, but also for the earth.
Hi, I'm Isaiah, an environmental educator and creator of Curbound Vegan, where I create introductory forums of environmentalism through colorful graphics, videos, and illustrations. And today I'm so thankful to host the episode of Now That's a Good Question, powered by CERC. And in today's episode, I'm going to be answering a few common questions on the topic, is the sustainability movement inclusive? So let's begin with the first question. Let's firstly start with understanding what sustainability is. The three words that describe sustainability for me are circularity, life, and death. This is because in many of the ways of how our natural life cycle works is that we use a circular framework to understand that once a living thing goes to death, it comes back as either life or another form of being. And so it's super important for me to recognize that in our natural life cycle of systems, it is also normal for many animal species and human species to experience death, as we all know that our living in this world or dimension is limited. And so this sustainability framework allows me to really understand this and apply it to my different works. And so inclusivity plays a crucial role in sustainability. And I'm often asked if sustainable lifestyles is a primarily a Western concept and how well the East is adapting to it. So I think to kind of really wind back down of sustainability, for me, it's an ancient Black, Indigenous, people of color tradition that looks into creating circular relationships with the land, the environment, the community, and living beings. And so I think that when the West over here is popularizing sustainability as this new thing, it's often a lie because many cultures in our families have been practicing sustainability for some reasons. And so the way that we view sustainability in the Western world is often portrayed as white individuals having these reusable or metal straws or mason jars. And so it's super important that we dissect this messaging because our own unique backgrounds and our cultural history is sustainable. And we've been doing this work for decades. And so I would hope that in the East or in different types of countries, wherever you're at, that you don't shame yourself thinking that you're not sustainable, but reconnecting with your own lived experiences and cultural history to recognize that we all have unique relationships with this planet and the way that we move. And I really do hope that sustainability evolves as a global concept. So let's move on to the next question. Continuing our discussion on inclusivity, let us understand if sustainability is a gender inclusive concept. You know, this is actually a very interesting phrasing because I think that sustainability, the lifestyle movement that's heavily popularized in social media, is very female dominating in the sense that there's more female representation. But we also need to ask ourselves which women are being represented. We need more Black, Indigenous women, trans women, non binary folks, femme folks to actually be represented in this movement. Because in reality, the ones that are generally being centered and publicized are white women. And so I think that in trying to understand, like, you know, is this a gender inclusive concept? Sustainability itself does not have any gendering labels because it's nature itself. It does not discriminate based of who you are and what you do. And so I think that though that women have played a very key relationship in rematriating the land, especially Indigenous, Afro-Indigenous individuals. So I think there is really this part where in lifestyle movements, they're not really portrayed as diverse. And so I think that in trying to get more people to learn about sustainability, we also need to be welcoming into different communities of how they're trying to understand sustainability because it's not just all about trying to live waste free or being vegan. It's about being the best to yourself, the planet, and your community. So this is something that I really hold true to myself. Well, that was an interesting question, isn't it? We are almost done with half of the episode here, and here's the fourth question that we received. People are embarking on a sustainable lifestyle should This is actually a really great one. So I think people who embark on this sustainability lifestyle should recognize the intrinsic injustices that are happening in our current political state. We really cannot live sustainably while actively ignoring social, racial, and environmental injustices. This is because with sustainability, it's recognizing that you are fighting for the planet, which means that you're also fighting for those who have been historically marginalized, oppressed, and still face active and high rates of violence. And so I think that you should recognize that if you're going to be living a sustainable lifestyle, that you also take the time to learn about geopolitics and other issues that are happening in your area, because this is what we need. We need more people speaking about injustices. And this thus then makes it more accessible for people to understand what it means to others. And that was a fun to answer. Let's see what the fifth question has in store for us. Expanding the narrative of the sustainability movement by making it more inclusive has umpteen benefits. Can you state some? This is actually a really interesting question because I think that with the sustainability movement, there is a lot of things to dissect. There's a lot of different industries where a lot of our interests intersect. And so I think the environment being at the middle of this is really interesting to see how it connects with the fashion industry, with the jewelry industry, with the video game industry, with animal agriculture industry. There's all this really intersections of the environment. And so I think the benefits of doing sustainability is that you get to expose yourself to global issues, which means that you're really learning about different sectors and different industries of how extractive they are and detrimental to the planet. And this is something that I think that a lot of us should definitely be mindful in trying to learn. So this is something that I really like. So we're slowly inching towards the end of the episode. And here's the sixth question. There's so much to the concept of sustainable development that issues like marine pollution, fair trade, and overconsumption are often alien to several minority sections of the community. How does one go about it? So while inclusivity has its own benefits, there's much more to the concept of sustainable development that issues, in my view, that sustainable development is very limiting in the way that we think about it. This is because sustainable development generally comes from institutional based frameworks that are upheld by the United Nations. And so I think in trying to find these issues that communities can go about it, we need to recognize that community based frameworks are essential in this movement, which means that you're listening, you're centering, and you're giving resources to those in the community rather than the institutions that are saying these different myriad of issues, which indeed are valid, but they don't necessarily address the root causes of why are we over consuming society? Why is there so much pollution in our area? So I think this with community development, community activism, and grassroots organizing, you're really giving the power to the community. I think it's really important that we remain critical of institutions that have for so long promised the community's liberation and really failed to address the intersections of justice and liberation for them. And before we conclude, here is the last question. One question about my sustainability that made you go, now that's a good question. One thing that I had in my sustainability journey was when I first heard about my cultural history, because I realized that there's so much sustainable practices embedded in the way that I cook, the way that I knit, the way that I talk to my family in their native language. So this is super important for me to recognize that sustainability is not always about practicing something, but it's doing something. And that can look very different for a lot of us. So that really was a blossoming moment for me. And thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Now That's a Good Question with me, Isaias. You can follow me at Queer Brown Vegan and join in next Friday with another change maker. See you.
Thank you for tuning in. See you next week with another segment of Now That's a Good Question, powered by Sok.